The first-class cabin was supposed to be a sanctuary above the clouds, a place of velvet seats, champagne flutes, and soft whispers. It was where people came to forget the world beneath them, to trade the chaos of airports for the hush of luxury. But tonight, serenity was impossible. A baby's cries shattered the silence. They started as small whimpers, but within minutes they grew into sharp, heart-piercing wails that echoed through every corner of the cabin. The sound climbed higher and higher, relentless, wrapping itself around passengers who had expected nothing but peace. A man tugged off his silk sleeping mask with a groan. A woman snapped her magazine shut, glaring toward the source. One passenger pressed noise-canceling headphones tighter against his ears, only to sigh when the baby's cries still managed to seep through. Flight attendants hurried down the aisle, their faces polite but their movements hurried. And there, in seat 2A, sat the man everyone recognized yet pretended not to stare at. Alexander Grant, the young millionaire whose name filled news headlines and business magazines, the man with an empire that stretched across continents. He had been called ruthless in the boardroom, brilliant in strategy, and untouchable in wealth. But at that moment, none of it mattered. His hair, normally sleek and styled, was slightly disheveled. His crisp shirt bore the wrinkles of stress. And in his arms was his greatest challenge yet, not an international merger, not a billion-dollar deal, but his daughter, red-faced and wailing with a force that shook him to his core. "Please, sweetheart, shush," Alexander whispered, rocking her gently. His voice cracked with exhaustion. He had tried everything, her bottle, her blanket, even walking the narrow aisle with her in his arms, but nothing soothed her. She only cried harder, her tiny fists flailing, her lungs stronger than he ever imagined they could be. Around him, patience wore thin. "This is unbearable," muttered a businessman, loud enough for others to hear. "Some of us paid for peace," complained another passenger, folding her arms. Alexander's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. For the first time in years, he felt utterly powerless. His fortune could buy estates, yachts, and private jets, but it could not silence his daughter's cries. And the glares of strangers, once insignificant to him, now pressed against his chest like weights. He felt judged, not as a businessman, not as a millionaire, but as a father who couldn't comfort his child. In the last row of first class, someone else noticed the scene. She was a girl who didn't belong to this world of luxury. Her seat looked too large for her frame, as if she had stumbled into it by accident. Her clothes were plain, her long hair tucked awkwardly behind her ears. She wore oversized glasses that slipped slightly down her nose every time she looked up. In her hands, she clutched a book so tightly her knuckles whitened, as though it was the only thing anchoring her to the earth. Her name was Lena. Nobody noticed her. Nobody ever did. She had spent her life fading into the background, her voice too soft, her presence too unremarkable. People overlooked her in classrooms, skipped her in conversations, forgot her even when she stood right beside them. She had learned to live in silence, to take comfort in being invisible. But tonight, invisibility hurt. Every time the baby cried, Lena's heart twisted. She saw Alexander's desperation, his helpless attempts to soothe his daughter, and the growing annoyance of the cabin around them. She knew what it was like to feel helpless. She knew what it was like to feel unwanted eyes of judgment. And though she had never been brave, something inside her stirred, a whisper that maybe, just maybe, she could do something. Her fingers trembled as she set her book aside. Her chest tightened as she stood, her knees weak with fear. The aisle stretched before her like a stage, every pair of eyes turning as she stepped into it. She wanted to sit back down, to shrink into her seat and disappear. But her feet kept moving, one step at a time, until she reached the man whose wealth made headlines and whose baby now clung to his shirt. Alexander blinked in surprise, caught off guard by the shy figure before him. Passengers leaned closer, whispering, curious. A girl like her did not belong in his world, and yet here she stood, looking at him with trembling resolve. Her voice shook when she spoke, but it carried just enough strength to be heard over the baby's cries. May I try?" she asked softly, her eyes flicking to the restless child. The cabin froze. Some passengers frowned, others exchanged skeptical glances. A few even scoffed under their breath. But Alexander only stared at her, his mind torn. Hand his daughter to a stranger. A girl he didn't know, whose name he didn't even ask. Every instinct screamed no, and yet, there was something in her eyes. Not pity, not irritation, but something deeper, gentleness. Sincerity. A quiet strength he had not expected from such a timid figure. Slowly, Hesitantly, he nodded. The girl's hands trembled as he placed the baby into her arms. For a moment, the cries continued, shrill and sharp. But then Lena began to hum. It was not a song of power or performance. It was a lullaby, so soft and delicate it seemed to melt into the air. Her voice was fragile, trembling at first, but as she continued, it grew steadier, warmer. It was a voice that wrapped around the baby like a blanket, carrying comfort that no riches could buy. The child's sobs slowed, her tiny fists unclenched. She blinked up at Lena with wide, teary eyes, as if recognizing something familiar in the sound. And then, as the lullaby flowed on, the baby's cries faded into hiccups, then into silence. She nestled against Lena's chest, her breathing evening out, her body relaxing at last. The cabin held its breath. The businessman lowered his phone. The woman in pearls, who had scoffed earlier, clasped her hands to her mouth. Even the flight attendants paused mid-stride, their eyes wide with disbelief. What left everyone speechless was not just that the baby had stopped crying. It was the girl's voice, gentle, soothing, yet carrying a depth of emotion that touched something raw in every soul present. It was as though she wasn't only singing to the child, but to the weary hearts of everyone listening. Her lullaby carried with it years of silence, of being unseen, of pouring love into a world that had never noticed her. And now, finally, someone was listening. When the final note lingered and faded, the silence that followed was not of irritation, but awe. Passengers who moments ago muttered in frustration now sat still, almost reverent. Alexander, whose life had been filled with power and prestige, looked at the shy girl before him with something he had not felt in a long time, humility. For in that moment, above the clouds, it was not the millionaire who had power, nor the passengers who had privilege. It was the shy, unseen girl who held the room, with nothing more than the quiet gift of her voice.